An English gent with a rather stylish goatee beard, who is also just a tad psycho, is back for a brand new series of adventures on Big Finish. I'm of course referring to the newly released The War Master, Ridge of the Timelords, starring the one and only Derek Jacobi. Before I even start this review, if you are interested by Derek Jacobi on Big Finish, and certainly the era of The War Master that has been developed over the past few years, I certainly recommend checking out my previous reviews on this series so far, including Only the Good and Master of Callous. Because to put it simply, since I started listening to Big Finish, I do believe back in late 2016, the War Master stuff has been some of my favourite of all time of Big Finish's back catalogue. Incredibly excited to be sitting down once again to take a look at yet another 4 adventures from the series. So this box set is currently available now to be purchased from the Big Finish website. The physical version is currently at the pre-order price of $22.99 and the download version is $19.99. This box set is in fact returning to a more stereotypical Big Finish box set where we have 4 separate stories. However, there is a little bit of an overarching plot arc throughout in order to connect all of the stories together. As per usual, we have Derek Jacobi as the War Master, as the main antagonist character, and of course your regular production team returning. So if you are interested by what I say throughout this review, I highly recommend checking out all of the story details as well as listening to the trailer, which is all available on the Big Finish website. As per usual, the producer and director of this series is Scott Handcock, the script editor is Nicholas Briggs, and the executive producers are Nicholas Briggs and Jason Haig-Ellery. This series does of course share 2 writers who I do believe haven't written for the War Master before, so it is really nice to see a new team of writers coming on board. This time round we have 2 episodes written by Tim Foley, and the other 2 episodes written by David Llewellyn. The first story of the 3rd season is The Survivor, written by Tim Foley. Seeing the War Master travel to Earth during the height of the Second World War. Throughout a number of Big Finish's Time War related releases, the World Wars have been used as a type of human comparison to the much larger chaos of the Time War itself, putting into context the vast scale, so it was nice to once again see a return to this setting. The Master slides into the earthly lay-people life with chilling ease, under the guise of a priest, which is a really lovely reference to the 3rd Doctor story, The Daemons. Whilst a local village woman who goes by the name of Lady Raleigh creates a woman's land army, doing their bit for the war effort. Laura Riseborough, Mina Anwar, Sue Douglas and Paul Clayton create a brilliant yet helpless atmosphere of an English village going through the World Wars, filled with many secrets and family revelation. This episode very quickly reminded me of an episode from the War Master Series 1, being The Skyman, written by James Goss. Not because of a similarity between the plotline, however due to the Master's brilliant ability to turn a microcosm of people against each other very quickly, through harsh manipulation and dangerous lack of emotion. One of the main things that I really like about the War Master series, and something of which I literally only just noticed as sitting down for this review, is the format is very unusual compared to that of a Doctor Who story, because normally you have the protagonist being the Doctor and his companions, and then you normally have the enemy or the monster that is meant to be the foe of the episode that is meant to be defeated. The War Master kind of changes that because the main character is actually the enemy. You're not necessarily meant to be rooting for the Master, you are essentially just watching this series to enjoy what he gets up to whilst the Doctor isn't around and when people are not there to stop him. And of course this episode does follow a very similar theme to other episodes in the War Master series, where you have the War Master taking up a disguise and kind of settling himself in within a community, gaining their trust and then very quickly throwing that back in their faces. And in particular of course in this story we have the events of the Second World War and having a rather stereotypical English village with those people that kind of know each other and know everything that is going on. However, the War Master does of course appear, and he is in fact taking refuge within a church that is his TARDIS disguised, and he becomes the priest of that village. And of course during the war, very much an emotional time where everybody is essentially vulnerable, where do most people go when they want to confess and kind of say what is on their mind? They go to the priest, and that is what we have in this episode. We have the priest or the Master kind of taking in everybody and kind of dealing with their emotions emotions and kind of helping them with their problems. However, there's one particular character in this story that the War Master takes a shine to. The character is Alice Pritchard, quite a young teenage character who's also a little bit vulnerable and naive. Of course, she's working as a part of the girls' land force, I suppose, or the land army. The War Master essentially using her as a lab rat, and I think that when you look into this story, it becomes even darker in your mind, because we have this character that is willing to open up her eyes and ears to that of religion and kind of to have this overall figure that is looking down on her, such as God in this sense, and the War Master uses that, and he essentially turns into this mouthpiece of her God, however uses that and manipulates it in order to get her to do what he wants, and that is in fact through a number of stones that are from a different planet that have special powers. We are also introduced in this story to a character called Hannah, portrayed by Laura Riseborough, and she is a very nasty piece of work, I think. She's from London and she's been brought back by her mother in order to help out, being Lady Raleigh, and she basically needs to do the usual chores that the other females are doing as a part of the land army. And basically she meets Alice and they get along to start with. However, she starts to be a little bit snaky, I suppose the today 21st century word will be to describe it, and she in fact kind of uses her emotions once again against her. It's kind of a ripple and a weak point within the village, which certainly is very important within the final act of this story, where you start to see people believing that other people are working for the Nazis and being spies, and of course having the "your country needs you" and propaganda being a very big theme in this story as well, and of course that whole idea of the Germans listening in that is used by the Master in this story in order to create a vulnerability within the different people, and in particular Alice, who is put on trial by the rest of the village because she is in fact believed to be a German spy. And there is a few shocking things in this story that do in fact come up that I completely didn't expect. I think that Tim Foley has in fact done a very good job to create a drama that is very gripping within 1 hour. You get used to all of the characters, but also at the same time I like the fact the War Master is only in the background. This story is solely about the village people in the actual episode and is not about the Master himself. He kind of just comes in when he is needed in order to make sure that things are going in the right way and kind of all the pieces are falling into place. I really love that. I do think that it would have been nice to maybe see a few more of the confession sequences. I think simply for the idea of comedy, it would have been nice to maybe see the Master in his little confession booth, just dealing with the everyday confessions that people make. Because I don't know, I stole a loaf of bread from the local shop in order to help my family with the rations or whatever. Just something like that. I think it would have made the story a little bit more light-hearted and a bit more fun, and certainly more of the actual period itself. The Coney Island Chameleon, written by David Llewellyn, is a rather exciting episode seeing the War Master travel to 1890s America. So far I have loved how this series has utilised Earth, as the previous 2 box sets have focused solely on other alien worlds. Giuseppe Sabatini, played by Yusuf Kirko, runs a form of freak show that is under threat due to expensive rent payments. One of the show's members is Esther, played by Taj Atwell, who can change her skin to appear like the surrounding area, very much like a chameleon. Throughout the story's duration, we see these 2 characters being hunted down by the War Master, due to an offer that Sabatini can't refuse. Not because it is an amazing offer or anything like that, but because if he does refuse it, he will almost certainly end up dead by the end of the story. This episode is a rather unique one compared to other War Master stories, simply down to its location choices and a plot very much focused on the lives of Esther and Sabatini. If you were to take the location out of the Coney Island Chameleon, it is essentially very similar to that of the previous story, because you have this female character that is essentially being monitored or tracked by the War Master for his external needs that presumably is going to get revealed in the later episodes of the set. And I think that this episode in particular is once again very character driven, however more so than the previous story, because in this episode we have that focus around Esther as well as Sabatini. However, I really believe their relationship. I love the idea of this freak show and the fact that she can change and all of that because she's a kind of an alien. I really like Sabatini as a person as well, because he has this whole problem of keeping up with the rent, but also at the same time he is essentially thrown this offer by the Master that could very easily solve all of his problems by trading Esther and buying her for a certain sum of money that would clear all of his debts. And very easily, just like that, Sabatini could say yes and all of his problems will be done and dusted. However, he has an emotional connection with Esther, and I don't really think that this story goes into that any further. I don't think it really says, is it just a strong friendship relationship? Is it a relationship that's a little bit more than that? And I kind of like that in this story. It's just two characters that quite obviously have a background, however it doesn't really want to delve into it further, and I love the fact that once again the Master only comes in when he is required in order to pursue the rest of the narrative and to kind of keep things going and to put different tests in there. It's essentially going to strain the relationship of Esther and Sabatini. A few moments in the theatre in the early half where they in fact put on lovely freak shows, and then the episode does all of a sudden take a little bit of a twist where it ends up almost a on-the-run story, being tracked down by the Master, who's also trying to be a police officer in a disguise, or a police sergeant from America. We have some excellent moments with Jacoby putting on an American accent, so that is quite a lot of fun. Sabatini in fact takes Esther to New Orleans, so many miles away, in order to seek a safer life, and of course the Master is soon on pursuit and does eventually meet up with them, which once again leads to a rather lovely ending final act for this story that really hits home how disconnected the War Master is from human relationships. He doesn't really understand emotions and people, or at least he does, and he knows how to manipulate them. And I'm going to in fact reveal what happens at the end of the story, simply because I didn't see it coming, and I in fact listened to this episode with a lot of focus because I was incredibly drawn into the episode as well as the actual characters themselves, and I didn't see the twist coming that was eventually going to happen. I think that David Llewellyn once again written this episode in a really effective manner to really hit home the emotions and feelings and lifestyle of the characters as well, but also the same way that he managed to work the exposition within the actual narrative, so you're kind of taking in a backstory without even realising it, was really effortlessly done by David Llewellyn, and I really respect him for that, and overall it was quite an entertaining yet hard-hitting story. And we also appreciate that this is now the second story of the box set and the second character that the Master is pretending to be in a disguise. He really does get involved with the actual places and locations he visits, and I really do like that about the War Master, because as in the behind the scenes it does mention, it really adds a nice sort of camp aspect to his character, but once again it's not overplayed. The third instalment of the War Master Series 3 is The Missing Link, once again written by Tim Foley. The first of a two-part adventure featuring Paul McGann as Doc Number 8. So far this series has seen a few unanswered questions, and I was relieved to see the first half of this episode starting to give answers to those questions. The Master has been collecting a range of species throughout the universe for a certain purpose and storing them in a hospital on the planet of Xenotopia, where further experiments can be carried out by employed scientists, very much like how we've seen with Esther and Alice in the previous two stories. This episode does give a sense of War Master series normality, with a group of unaware aliens helping out the Master carry out his evil tasks, which by the end would equal a much grander and bigger scheme relating to the Time War. As always, the 8th Doctor does answer a form of distress call and naturally tries his best to help out, leading to him meeting the War Master. The previous two episodes have seen a very different style of story, and with very different characters. Following up with this more Doctor Who style science fiction episode could be a little bit of a risk, but it does the job of setting up the foundation of the series finale. I think that it must be said that for me, Missing Link is kind of not necessarily the dud of the series, but is kind of the episode with the least amount going on, and I don't think that that is simply down to the story. I don't think that it's to blame in any means. However, I think that this episode does have a certain job, and it does that job, and it can't really do anything other than the job it has been given, and that is to set up the series finale, because we need to have the new location being brought in, establishing the problem of what the Master has been doing in the previous two stories, because I must admit, at this point in the series, I did think I was missing something. I felt like I was almost jumping a few tracks in a way, and it wasn't exactly revealing what the Master was doing, why he was collecting up these two people in the previous episode. And of course, with this episode answering that, it does take up a little bit more time, as well as building up the location of Xenotopia and the hospital and doing these different experiments on people. I do kind of think it would have been nice to maybe see a bit more of. Of course, we did have the reintroduction of a few characters in this episode as well, which was lovely. Once again, gave the series a bit of a complete feel. One of the things that I will give this story credit for is bringing the Time War almost back to the forefront, because in the previous two stories we have almost deviated from that fact that this is the Master from within the Time War, other than the fact that he's building a weapon relating to the Time War itself. And I think that in this story we get that very ominous buzz almost of the Time War being in the background, which is something of which that is used quite a lot of in other series. You always have that idea that the Time War is buzzing away in the background and other events are happening on other worlds at the same time. And that is very much the same sense in this story, because you have Xenotopia, where all of the bodies are being sent to be experimented on by the Master, by the scientists that he has employed to do the job for him. And then you have this whole idea of this planet that hasn't really been affected by the Time War as much as of yet. However, eventually it will be affected by it. One of the main focuses, of course, of this story is the Doctor actually meeting the War Master, because within the TV show itself, of course, we had Professor Yana. However, that character wasn't the Master. It was this innocent professor. He didn't believe he was the Master, and then when he did find out he was the Master, there wasn't actually really any scenes between him and the Doctor together within the same room. Therefore, this box set does that very job. It has the Doctor and the Master within the same room and actually interacting with each other. And I think that this box set proves, not that it needed proving already, because we all know that Derek Jacobi should have been given more screen time, and the fact that he didn't was one of the biggest mistakes that new series Doctor Who ever made. We should have kept him after Utopia, and we should have had a few episodes with Derek Jacobi as the actual Master, as opposed to instantly regenerating into John Sim. And if there was any evidence needed to prove that, then this story is exactly that. There is a relationship between the Doctor and the Master that isn't that type of relationship of hatred or two enemies together, but is in fact that relationship that is based upon past experiences and respect. I think it will be fair to say that they are friends and they kind of like each other, and there is this unusual sense with the 8th Doctor and the War Master, especially within the second half of this story, the series finale of this box set, where you kind of feel like they like each other. They are two friends that kind of disagree, but they still kind of learn to get along when they kind of need to in order to save the entire universe. Doctor throughout this story does pretty much take the role of the 8th Doctor in any other story, answering a distress call in the Time War, trying to come to help, and then he does in fact meet a female character along the way that we may or may not have seen within a previous story. Spoilers, I'm not going to say anything more than that. However, they do become that relationship of a Doctor and a companion, and I was really nervous that it was just going to become a Doctor Who story. Like the Doctor was the protagonist, and I kind of feel within the War Master series, the War Master should always be the main focus, which is something that has always been the pivotal point of the past two box sets. Regardless of what is going on, the Master has control over it. And I feel like this story in the very middle of the set does almost take that away a little bit. It does feel like the Doctor is almost in control. However, in the later half, what I really love is that that is almost turned on its head, especially within part 4, because we once again get that continuation of the relationship between the War Master and the Doctor. However, it is clear that the War Master has the upper hand, and that makes for a very interesting final act within that story, and something of which that once again you can't really predict ahead from, I don't think. I think the War Master is always several thousand steps ahead. He knows every single different possible outcome, and he is planned for all of those different outcomes, as well as throwing in a few jokes at the same time, because he is an intelligent, respectable Time Lord, and the Doctor knows that. And I think that Paul McGann, as always, he was excellent. I think Paul McGann is just a brilliant Doctor within audio. His voice to start with is so soothing, and it's basically the Doctor equivalent of an ASMR. It's just pleasant in every way. And of course the War Master, I've not really commented on Derek as a whole in this box set, but I think it is generally just a given. He's brilliant as per usual. His character is cunning, devious, evil, and he's just a character that you can't help but love, but hate at the same time. Following on from episode 3, we have the final episode of the box set, being Darkness and Light, written by David Llewellyn, which sees the Doctor and the Master working together, as the Master's experimental weapon, now known as the Rage, has been created and is let loose on the hospital planet of Xenotopia. Seeing Jacoby play off another incarnation of the Doctor within the same room is simply such a privilege, and one of which that we never got to see unfold on our TV screens, and it is stories such as this that make up for the lack of Jacoby within the TV show itself. The intelligence of both characters is simply obvious, and the relationship is not one of hatred or revenge, but is one of arguably friendship. Two people who respect each other, but also know that they have completely different opinions. At points in this story, I did feel that the 8th Doctor may have been present a little bit too much, and made this story feel like a little bit more of an 8th Doctor Time War adventure, as opposed to being a part of the War Master series, and the War Master is, after all, the main character. However, Llewellyn's way of writing did flip this within the final act, making for an intelligent, well-acted final. Having the genesis of rage within the final story does give the episode and the series a sense of completion. Of course, within the previous 3 stories, we've had almost the build-up to this final point. The Master has been going off on his different adventures, collecting different people on the way, and this is the result of that. And I think that is a really effective way to create a box set, and it is very much on the same lines as the previous ones as well. The Master has this idea to create a weapon. By the end of the box set, he creates the weapon, and it's either successful or it backfires, and to an extent the Master does win. It's not a complete win, however it is a win nevertheless, and the Doctor is kind of left in a scenario that does make him rather vulnerable, and that is how the War Master series should be, because he's the all-powerful one, and at the end of the day he can't be brought down. Well, he can, but we don't want to think that, because it's Derek Jacobi and I want his episodes forever and ever, because he's just perfect in every way. I would like to refer to episode 4 as the technobabble one, because there's lots of scientific stuff and lots of different things going on that relate to science and black holes and energy and things like that, and quite frankly when it comes to stories such as that, it does normally go straight over my head because I can't really comprehend it. I'm not that good at physics and I can't really change that, and I think that is something that is prominent throughout a lot of the 8th Doctor adventures. I've heard that it's very prominent throughout Dark Eyes, and it can be prominent throughout the 8th Doctor Time War series. However, I think that David Llewellyn does write this story rather well. I respect his scientific stuff that he's included, but I don't think his way of presenting it is as clear as other writers. What I do love about David Llewellyn's writing though, however, is that it is gorgeous to listen to. I think that his way of writing is just incredibly poetic. In case you couldn't gather from the title of this episode itself, The Darkness and the Light, everything about this story feels poetic, an almost unusual sense of peace throughout it because of the relationship that the Doctor and the Master has, and then bouncing off each other, these different lines. Everything about the episode is kind of evil but pleasant at the same time. It certainly makes me respect the episode a little bit more, because at the same time of there being scientific stuff, there is also an emotional narrative as well, working with different people, working with the monster, and that relationship between the Doctor and the Master. And if it didn't include those emotional themes tying to the narrative itself, then this story was at threat of being just another one of those scientific technobabble stories that the 8th Doctor Time War series has produced before. This episode is a lot more than that and has a lot more levels to it. Overall, for this review of Doctor Who The War Master Series 3, Rage of the Timelords, starring Derek Jacobi, once again this is another set of really good high quality adventures starring the War Master, and I think that something about this series, as well as the previous box sets, is that there has been something for everyone. It is a series with a lot of variety, and not necessarily much of a format either. I think that the previous box sets, of course the last one, The Master of Callus, was one big 4-hour interlocking story. In the first box set you had a more series format, where you had different serials and different episodes within different locations, however a plot arc intertwined throughout all 4 of those stories. This box set kind of follows a similar design to that, however narrative wise it is a little bit more reliant on each episode, especially episodes 3 and 4, who are completely reliant on each other in order to work. The first episodes are kind of the foundation stories, having the going out and finding the bodies that he is needing testing for his experiments, and then the final 2 episodes kind of incorporate those bodies into the actual experiment. And I think if anything, if there was anything to be improved for this box set, it is around episode 3 and episode 4. I think that needed a bit more development, as opposed to it being completely based within the hospital and the genesis of Rage as an actual creature. That I think to an extent may have also needed a bit more development, because I wasn't really seeing too much of a weapon. I was kind of just seeing this, not necessarily a big bog-eyed monster, but it was kind of a creature that was all-powerful, but the risk of it being all-powerful is that it's incredibly hard to defeat and incredibly hard to write a fitting ending. And I think that this series just about manages it, but for me, my highlights are for definite the opening 2 stories. I absolutely love the opening 2 episodes, both based on Earth, both contribute something different, and are both very character driven, and for me, those are the standout episodes for this box set, and the remaining 2 are also very good in their own way, and once again, they are still keeping up the very high stakes of this series, and I can't wait to see how it pans out for the 4th and final box set of this current run. One of the things that I've noticed about the War Master series, and this goes for all 3 of the box sets released so far, is that there is so much to talk about. I have found myself actually discussing the contents of the stories within these box sets with other people on a number of occasions, especially the case within the first 2 episodes of this set as well, where I kind of feel like so much development with the characters and so much discussions that you can actually have about those characters that makes the actual box sets really captivating and really interesting to listen to. This unusual place where naturally I want to see more of Derek Jacobi as the War Master, but I don't want them to overdo it. I don't want them to do too much with him. And I kind of think that if they continue the same very high standard with the 4th and final box set due out in December, which is Anti-Genesis featuring the Daleks, which sounds very exciting, judging by the trailer that is now also available, I think that we could be looking at one of the best series overall of all 4 box sets and some of the strongest that Big Finish has produced, but I do worry if it starts to go beyond that, will it start to lose its high quality status? Are they able to keep it up there forever? Maybe this should just end it on a high. Who knows? I suppose we'll see all of that within the next box set. And of course, Derek Jacobi is also going to be featuring within Ravenous 4 as well, so that can fill in the gap between now and Anti-Genesis in December. So thank you very much for watching this review of the War Master, Rage of the Timelords. If you have any questions about this box set, then please do leave them in the comments section below, and we'll of course reply to them at some point in the near future, along with any questions about Derek Jacobi on Big Finish and the War Master series as a whole. As per usual, stay tuned for more Doctor Who content every single week on the Host Productions, and of course I will see you all next time. Bye for now.